time for the video of the day. This is Trucks Bring Things Part 2. I'm going to take a few minutes here and I'm going to convince you that trucks bring everything. Okay? Now this is going to be a day in the life of a man, just because I'm a man. This is going to be the day in the life of a man. Okay? And I'm going to show you through this, and you're going to catch on before this video's even half over. You're going to catch on to everything. Okay? So, we're going to start out first thing in the morning. Guy's laying in bed. He's sleeping. And the alarm goes off. He reaches over and he turns the alarm off. But what he doesn't realize just yet is that alarm clock was on a truck at one time. Okay? So he throws the covers back, gets out of bed, goes into the bathroom, lifts up the toilet seat lid because obviously his wife gets mad if he doesn't put it down. And what doesn't occur to him while he's doing his business is that toilet seat and the toilet were on a truck at one time. So he finishes his business, he goes over to the sink, reaches up into the cabinet and gets out his shaving cream and his razor, which was, both those were on a truck at one time. Turns on the water and he shaves. Does all his business in the bathroom. Goes over to back to the bedroom and gets his clothes out. And what he doesn't realize yet is all these clothes, his shirt, his suit, his tie, his socks, his underwear, his shoes, they were all on a truck at one time. So he gets dressed and he goes downstairs and he's going to fix him some breakfast. So he decides he wants an egg omelet. So he gets the pan out, sets it on the stove. He goes to the refrigerator and gets out all the stuff he needs for his omelet. Well, folks, let me tell you something. That pan was on a truck at one time. That stove that he's cooking on was on a truck at one time. The eggs, the onions, the peppers, the cheese, everything he's putting in that omelet was on a truck at one time. So he cooks his omelet. And while his omelet's cooking, he reaches over and he hits the button on the coffee maker to make him some coffee. That coffee maker was on a truck at one time. The beans that he put in that coffee maker the night before and the filter were on a truck at one time. So he goes ahead, he pours himself a cup of coffee, sits down at the table, eats his breakfast. Gets up, goes over, grabs his suit jacket, puts it on, grabs his briefcase, looks up at the clock and says, "Oh crap, I'm late." So he reaches up into the cupboard and he grabs his to-go cup and he sets it down on the counter and he pulls the lid off and he pours his cup in. That to-go cup was on a truck at one time. And he takes his lid and he puts it on there and he puts the cup and the plates in the sink and he takes off out the door. He goes out the door. He gets into the garage and he opens up the door of his Lexus and he sits down in the car. That car was on a truck at one time. All the components that make up that car. The tires, the wheels, the bumper, the engine, the transmission, the steering wheel, the dashboard, the radio, the windshield, the rear window, the windows and the doors themselves. All that stuff was on a truck at one time. So he reaches up and he hits the little button and the garage door goes and opens up. Yep. That garage door and the garage door opener and the little button he hit were on a truck at one time. So he backs out of the driveway, drives down the road, gets up on the interstate, reaches over to grab his coffee and take a sip, and he goes up to put it up to his mouth, and it goes all down the front of him because he forgot to put the lid on tight. So now what's he going to do? So he looks up and he sees a sign for the rest area. He's going to pull off the rest area. And as he pulls into the rest area, he realizes, all the stuff that made up this building was on a truck at one time. So he goes inside and he gets the soap out of the dispenser. The dispenser and the soap were on a truck at one time. And he cleans himself up as best he can. Gets back in the car and he heads on into work. He gets to work and he walks in the front door and there's the security guard Paul sitting there. And he looks over and he says, "Good morning, Paul." And Paul, being his nice cheerful self, looks up in his newspaper and says, What he realizes suddenly is this building that he works in, everything that's in it, the wires, the lights, the piping, the light bulbs, the wallpaper, the trim, the desk, everything including Paul's newspaper, was on a truck at one time. So he gets up to his office and he walks in the office, sits down at his desk, and he realizes that the chair that he's sitting in was on a truck at one time. So he looks over his in basket and his out basket, and his in basket's full. So he reaches over and he grabs the paper and he looks down at the paper, and the very first paper on top has something to do with dates and things having to be there at a certain day. Needs his signature. So he turns around, on the wall there's a calendar. That calendar was on a truck at one time. So he turns back around and the dates jive. So he reaches over to grab his pen to put his signature on it. The pen was on a truck at one time. So he fills it out and he signs his name and he puts it in his outbox. And he looks over at these two wire baskets and he realizes those wire baskets were on a truck at one time. And even more than that, the wires that make up the wire basket and the solder used to join them together, that was all on a truck at one time. Starting to click with him. So he takes the rest of his papers that are sitting on his desk, which, by the way, his desk was on a truck at one time. And he does the rest of his work that he has to do, and he gets on his computer to answer some emails. And, oh, by the way, the computer, yep, it was on a truck at one time. All the components that make up the computer was on a truck at one time. So he goes ahead and he finishes his work, and here it is, it's lunchtime. He looks up at the clock, it's lunchtime. By the way, that clock was on the truck at one time. So he goes ahead and he grabs his paper sack, it's got his lunch in it, and he goes down to the lunchroom. He walks in the lunchroom and he sees a couple rows of tables with chairs, and he realizes those tables and chairs were on a truck at one time. So he goes over to the counter and he sets the bag down, he pulls the plastic bowl out, and it's goulash left over from the night before, and so he puts it in the microwave to heat it up, and he realizes that microwave was on a truck at one time. Then he goes over to the condiment area where they got spoons and forks and knives, plastic ones, and they got ketchup, mustard, all that stuff, and all that stuff was on a truck at one time. So he gets out a plastic spoon, he sits down, he eats his lunch, and he decides he better wash that bowl out, because if he doesn't, his wife's going to kick his butt. So he goes over to the sink and he gets a little dish soap. The dish soap. Yep, you got it. It was on a truck at one time. He puts a little dish soap in there and he washes out the bowl and he puts it back in the paper bag. The paper bag, by the way, was, yep, on a truck at one time. And he goes back up to his office and he finishes his day. And he's had a long day. He's worked 8 hours. And he sits there for a minute at the end of his day and he thinks, geez, I think most truck drivers work 10 hours, don't they? He's had a long day, but there's probably a truck driver out there that's worked a little bit longer. So he goes back downstairs, and he gets in his Lexus and he's driving home. He gets caught on the interstate in traffic because they're doing construction. They're tearing up, they got the concrete all tore up and they're laying asphalt. And as he's driving through the construction, he looks over and he realizes the asphalt that they're putting into that machine that's going onto the road to make up the road, it's on a truck. So even the road that he drives on was on a truck at one time. So he gets off the exit, he gets down to his house, hits the little button again, the garage door goes up, he pulls that Lexus into the garage, gets out of the car, goes inside. His kids are sitting there at the dining room table doing their homework. And he walks inside, he kisses his beautiful wife. That is, unless he had an ugly wife. Then he kissed his ugly wife. Either way, I'd be kissing my beautiful wife. And he told the kids, hey, come on, put your books and stuff away for now. We're going to set the table for dinner. So the kids take their papers and their pencils and their books, and they're going to take them up to their room, and suddenly he realizes those books and papers and pencils and all that stuff were all on a truck at one time. So he goes over and he grabs the plates out of the cupboard, and the plates were on a truck at one time, as well as the cupboard. And he hands Heckle the plates, and he says, here, put those on the table. And he reaches in the drawer, and he grabs all the silverware, and he hands that to Jekyll. Those are his two kids. And they go over and they set the table. And he goes over and helps his wife dish out all the food, and he realizes all this food was on a truck at one time. The bowls that they're dishing them into were on a truck at one time, as well as the utensils that they're using to serve themselves were all on a truck at one time. So he sits down at the table with his family and he grabs his linen napkin, which he realizes was on a truck at one time. And he puts it across his lap and he has his dinner. After dinner's over, he tells the kids, okay, come on, clear this table and get these dishes in the dishwasher, let's go. Then he realized the dishwasher was on a truck at one time. The soap that he used in the dishwasher was on a truck at one time. So the kids get up and clear the table, and him and his wife go into the other room. He sits down in his easy chair, and he sits down, he reaches down, he grabs the little handle and kick his feet up so he can relax. And he realizes that chair was on a truck at one time, and all the components that make up that chair were on a truck at one time. So he says, I've had enough of this today. He reaches over and he grabs the remote, he hits the button, and he realizes the remote and the TV were on a truck at one time, as were the batteries that control the remote. And then the cable box was on a truck at one time. The wire that brings the juice into the cable box was on a truck at one time. You catching this? He goes upstairs, finally takes a shower, and he realizes that the water was not a truck at one time, but the pipes that bring the water into his house were. And he lays down in his bed that was on a truck at one time, on his mattress and box springs that were on a truck at one time, covered with his sheets and pillowcases that were on a truck at one time. And his wife asks him, honey, what's wrong? And he says, I just realized there isn't anything in my life that hasn't been on a truck at one time or another. And he reaches over and he kisses his beautiful wife goodnight. And he wants to turn the lamp off and realize that the lamp and the light bulb were on a truck at one time. And he goes to sleep with a whole new respect for truck drivers. That's the video of the day for today. Hope you've enjoyed it. And until next time, this is Greg the Crazy Trucker saying, see ya!